7 inmates drove out in an official vehicle through the main gate of the high-security prison, one from which no one had ever escaped before. At the time, they were the most wanted men in all of America. Everything was at stake, one of the investigators later stated. A mass breakout from the John B. Connally Unit just shouldn't be possible. It was a modern maximum security fortress in South Texas, opened just 5 years earlier. It was a sprawling complex of concrete and steel designed to hold over 2,000 of the state's most dangerous offenders. Before this, no one had ever escaped from this prison. Yet, on December 13th, 2000, it happened. 7 prisoners vanished from the Connally Unit, and one of them leaving behind a chilling note. "You haven't heard the last of us yet." The brazen taunt would soon prove prophetic, as the escape of the Texas 7 unleashed a 6-week spree of robberies, manhunts, and a deadly showdown hundreds of miles away. These 7 convicts, all hardened by violent pasts and long sentences, defied the odds with a mix of cunning, patience, and sheer desperation. Their story plays out like a Hollywood thriller, except every bit of it is true. To pull something like this off, you don't just need an inmate, you need a genius, or a madman. And inside the Connally Unit, there was such a man. His name was George Rivas, and at 30 years old, he was already a legend among inmates. Not for his strength, but for an audacious streak that bordered on insanity. He was serving 18 consecutive 15-to-life sentences for armed robbery and kidnapping. To Rivas, that amounted to a slow death behind bars. He would never walk free unless he took matters into his own hands. George believed the system was mocking him. A sentence of 270 years before parole felt absurd for robberies where he hadn't killed anyone. He had 2 choices: die an old man in a concrete box, or be killed, something that happened often in that prison. But in his mind, a third option burned bright: escape. Every night in his cell, he dreamed of breaking out and proving the system couldn't hold him forever. He wanted to risk everything for a single cent of freedom. But dreams don't break down walls. To escape, he needed a plan. So, he began to watch. The prison was secure, but with obsessive patience, he began to notice the small cracks in the fortress, and a wild plan started to form. This plan was one of the most daring ever conceived in America. George intended to disguise himself as a guard and simply drive out of the prison's main gate in an official vehicle. Yeah, you heard that right. Just drive out the front door of one of the most heavily guarded prisons in the state. George wasn't a madman, he was a calculator, and he believed this calculated risk had a high chance of success. To pull it off, however, he needed a team. He found 6 kindred spirits among his fellow prisoners, all men with long or life sentences and absolutely nothing to lose. He deliberately sought out inmates with no chance of release in the next 15 years, men he believed were hungry enough to take the ultimate risk. They included hardened criminals convicted of murder, robbery, and assault, men like Donald Newberry, Michael Rodriguez, Larry Harper, Patrick Murphy, Joseph Garcia, and a younger inmate, Randy Halprin. Behind bars, these 7 formed a brotherhood with a single unifying goal: freedom at any cost. Rivas was the mastermind. Charismatic and methodical, he spent months observing routines like a predator studying its prey. He noted when guards changed shifts, when supervisors looked away, and which spots had camera blind zones. One area in particular drew his eye: the maintenance shop. Civilian employees worked there alongside a select crew of inmates. Rivas managed to get himself assigned to this detail and maneuvered his trusted allies into the crew with him. and by late 2000, 6 of the 7 were working in the maintenance shop, giving them daily access to tools, supplies, and the perfect stage for their plan. They even arranged for one conspirator not officially on the crew to slip in on the big day. A short-handed staff made it easier. An extra inmate hanging around wouldn't immediately raise suspicion. Over weeks of quiet planning, the 7 refined their scheme. They whispered during work shifts and in the yard, sketching out details bit by bit. Some nights in their cells, they'd fantasize about life outside. Cold beers, hot meals, open roads. Rivas also cast their escape as a rebellion. In his view, they weren't just breaking out for themselves, but striking back at the tyranny of the system they felt had wronged them. A few of the men wrote on their mini manifestos vowing a revolution of their own. If they pulled this off, they wanted the world to know it wasn't just about freedom, it was a statement. This shared goal created a powerful, unbreakable bond. Crucially, one of them had support waiting beyond the walls. Michael Rodriguez had enlisted his father to help. In secret, arrangements were made for a getaway car to be stashed not far from the prison. The plan was to escape in a prison truck, then ditch it and switch to this civilian car, making it much harder for authorities to track them. The chosen day was December 13th, 2000. Just before the holidays, a time when security might be a little bit lax and staff distracted. That morning, the 7 men steeled themselves. Today was the day they would either taste freedom or die trying. Late that morning, around 11:20 a.m., the maintenance shop was humming with routine activity. No one suspected that within minutes, this ordinary room would become a scene of chaos and terror. Rivas waited patiently for the perfect moment, when the guards' attention wavered and many staff were heading to lunch. At his signal, they struck. In an instant, the routine shattered. One inmate crept behind a civilian worker and pressed a sharpened screwdriver to his throat, hissing, "Don't make a sound." Another pounced on a maintenance supervisor, wrestling him down before he could shout. A third lunged at the lone guard, knocking the radio from his hand before he could call for help. Within minutes, the 7 had overpowered everyone. "Down on the floor now," they yelled, flashing shanks and tools. 13 employees and guards dropped to the ground. Later, one guard who had a knife to his throat admitted, "Once they had that knife on me, I knew I'd better do what they said." In minutes, the maintenance shop was under their complete control. Wasting no time, they moved to the next phase: disguise and armament. They tore off their prison uniforms and threw on clothing taken from the civilians and guards. 2 of them donned actual guard uniforms. The others pulled on gray maintenance shirts, looking for all the world like regular prison workers. Meanwhile, Rivas and his men raided the shop's security cage. There, they found a small arsenal: handguns, a shotgun, an AR-15 rifle, and boxes of ammunition. In a matter of minutes, they went from unarmed prisoners to an armed gang bristling with guns. Amazingly, no alarm had been raised. During the takeover, a captive officer had managed to hit a silent panic button, but in a control room, the signal was disastrously misinterpreted as a glitch. No one was coming. Before they fled, the convicts left their message. On a piece of paper, one of them scrawled a warning and propped it on the table. "You haven't heard the last of us yet." It was a final act of defiance, a promise that their saga was just beginning. Now for the final act. The 7 hustled out into the maintenance yard where a white prison pickup was parked. Rivas jumped into the driver's seat wearing the guard uniform, fighting to appear calm. The remaining 5 clambered into the back, crouched low under a canvas tarp. Heart pounding, Rivas steered the truck toward the main gate. This was it. Every hour of observation, every whispered plan, it all came down to the next 60 seconds. One wrong move, one flicker of doubt in his eyes, and they would die in this prison. A guard at the gatehouse motioned for the truck to halt. Rivas braced and handed over a forged work order. The gate guard took a quick look. Everything appeared normal. He nodded and hit the switch. With a heavy click, the secure gate slid open. Rivas casually drove through. Then, he was out. He pressed the accelerator and the truck sped away from the prison. Incredibly, the Texas 7 had just driven out of a maximum security penitentiary in broad daylight. Once clear of the facility, just a few miles down the road, they pulled into a Walmart parking lot. There, exactly as arranged, was the getaway vehicle. They abandoned the prison truck and piled into an innocuous brown pickup. By the time the first prison staff raised the alarm, the Texas 7 were ghosts. The 7 men felt a surge of triumph. They were free. But freedom on an empty stomach with empty pockets is just a different kind of cage. They knew every officer in Texas would soon be hunting them, so they desperately needed money, supplies, and a head start. The very next day, they decided to strike again. Their first stop was a Radio Shack near Houston. They stormed in with guns, terrified the clerks, and snatched about $2,000 in cash. More importantly, they grabbed police scanners and two-way radios. Now, they could hear their hunters coming. With cash and their new scanners crackling with police chatter, the group headed north to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They split up, renting motel rooms with fake names, trying to blend in. For a short time, they kept a low profile, but 7 men on the run burned through cash pretty quickly. They needed one more big score, a heist that would set them up for a long time. They chose Oshman Sporting Goods in Irving. The date, Christmas Eve 2000. This decision would turn their escape into a tragedy and make them the most wanted men in America. That evening, as the store prepared to close, the Texas 7 made their move. They stormed into Oshman's, brandishing guns and barking orders. They moved with the same brutal efficiency as in the prison. Employees were tied up and gagged. They looted the store's inventory, grabbing at least 40 guns and boxes of ammunition. From the office safe, they took about $70,000 in cash. It was a massive score. As they were loading their haul, a former employee sitting in her car outside noticed the commotion and called the police. Officer Aubrey Hawkins was just 29 years old, and he was having Christmas Eve dinner with his wife and young son. He was probably thinking about the presents under the tree when the call came over the radio about a robbery in progress. A dedicated officer, he rushed to respond. He had no idea he wasn't just responding to another robbery. He was driving towards 7 desperate men for whom his life was worth nothing next to their freedom. This Christmas Eve dinner would be his last. Hawkins arrived at the back of the store just as the Texas 7 were making their escape. He stepped out of his patrol car and was immediately ambushed. The fugitives opened fire without warning, hitting him multiple times before he could even draw his weapon. He fell to the ground, severely wounded. In a final brutal act, one of the convicts drove Hawkins' own police car over his downed body to ensure he wouldn't get up. In the next moment, the gang sped away, disappearing into the night. Officer Hawkins was rushed to a hospital, but he died from his wounds. The murder of a police officer on Christmas Eve changed everything. Public horror turned into a furious demand for justice. A manhunt exploded into a nationwide priority. The Texas 7 were now America's most wanted. Realizing Texas was now too hot, the fugitives fled north into Colorado. Using the blood money from Oshman's, they bought a large RV to live in and parked it in a campground in Woodland Park, a small mountain town. To avoid suspicion, they crafted a new cover story. They pretended to be traveling Christian missionaries, playing loud gospel music from their RV to fool the neighbors. For several weeks, this bizarre ruse actually worked. Surrounded by snow and pine trees, the 7 men laid low while the entire country searched for them. The break that would end their run came from a television show. On January 20th, 2001, America's Most Wanted featured the Texas 7. Millions saw the broadcast, including a viewer in Colorado who thought the new missionaries at his local RV park looked oddly familiar. he tipped off the police. On January 22nd, a massive task force of FBI agents, US Marshals, and local police quietly surrounded the Coachlight RV park. That afternoon, as Rivas, Rodriguez, and Garcia drove into town, SWAT units surprised them at a gas station and arrested them on the spot. Simultaneously, police converged on the RV. Inside were Halprin and Harper. Randy Halprin chose to give up and walked out with his hands raised, but Larry Harper had sworn he would never go back to prison. As a tense standoff ensued, Harper took his own life with a gunshot. 2 members were still at large, Donald Newbury and Patrick Murphy, but the net was closing. The next day, authorities tracked them to a motel in Colorado Springs. Surrounded, the final 2 fugitives made one last demand: to speak to the media. In a phone call broadcast on live TV, they ranted about the corrupt Texas justice system. After saying their piece, the 2 exhausted fugitives finally surrendered. After 41 days of stolen freedom, the dream was over. The men who had planned the impossible escape now faced the one thing they feared more than anything: the consequences. The 6 surviving members were extradited back to Texas. Each man was charged with capital murder for the killing of Officer Hawkins. Over the next year, all 6 were convicted and sentenced to death. In the years that followed, 4 of the Texas 7 have been executed by lethal injection, including ringleader George Rivas in 2012. As of 2025, the remaining 2, Patrick Murphy and Randy Halprin, are still on death row. The Texas prison system, deeply embarrassed, implemented sweeping security reforms to ensure such a breakout could never happen again. The story of the Texas 7 remains one of the most daring prison escapes in American history, but it ended the way such stories always do, with the outlaws captured or dead. Their infamous note, "You haven't heard the last of us," was their challenge to the world. And for a time, the world heard a great deal from the Texas 7. But in the end, their violent grab for freedom ensured they would never truly have it again. If you enjoyed this Prison Break case, check out the channel. There you'll find many great stories just like this one. If you like what you see, please subscribe. I'd be very grateful, and I'll catch you next time.